All right. Let's dive into this shadowy world of the Wolfman. You shared a review of the 2010 film.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I'm really intrigued by how this film tackles classic monster movie tropes, but also explores some deeper, darker themes.
Yeah.
And we're talking gothic atmosphere, family secrets, the whole nature of the beast thing. It sounds like there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah. What strikes me is how the Wolfman uses the werewolf myth as a springboard to delve into some really fascinating psychological territory. It's not just about a man turning into a monster. It's about the monster that might already exist within us all.
Exactly. And the setting plays a huge role in that. Victorian England, shrouded in fog, with the imposing Talbot Manor looming over everything. The review mentions cinematographer Shelley Johnston, who's known for his evocative visuals. I'm picturing a lot of shadows and stark contrasts playing on those classic gothic horror elements.
Yeah, that visual style is crucial. Think about the way gothic horror uses darkness and light, not just for atmosphere, but to symbolize the struggle between reason and primal instinct, between civilization and the wild. The Wolfman seems to be playing with those contrasts, visually and thematically.
Right. And then there's Benicio Del Toro as Lawrence Talbot. His performance is described as haunting, which seems fitting given the subject matter. He's got that brooding intensity that really lends itself to a character wrestling with inner demons, literally in this case.
Right. Del Toro's performance is key to understanding the film's exploration of duality. The werewolf transformation isn't just a physical change. It's a manifestation of Lawrence's repressed rage, his trauma, perhaps even his guilt. The film blurs the lines between man and beast, asking us to consider what separates us from the darkness within.
The review highlights the Oscar-winning makeup by Rick Baker. That's interesting because it suggests the film is committed to practical effects, which often create a more visceral, unsettling feeling in horror films.
Absolutely. The choice to utilize practical effects for the transformation scenes adds a layer of realism and physicality to the horror. It's not just pixels on a screen. It's a tangible, grotesque metamorphosis happening right before your eyes. That tactile element can be far more disturbing, tapping into a primal fear of bodily violation and the loss of control.
The review mentions that while the ending delivers on a visceral level, it leaves some character arcs and themes underdeveloped, particularly the relationship between Lawrence and his father, Sir John, played by Anthony Hopkins. That seems like a missed opportunity, considering the potential for psychological drama there.
Yeah. The dynamic between Lawrence and Sir John is ripe with symbolic meaning. You have the aging patriarch, potentially representing the sins of the past, and the son who inherits not just a title, but also a legacy of trauma and violence. It's a classic gothic horror trope. The sins of the father revisited upon the son.
I'm curious about how those family secrets might tie into the larger themes of transformation and duality. Is the curse solely a physical affliction, or is it also symbolic of a psychological inheritance, something passed down through generations, like a darkness in the bloodline?
That's a question the film seems to be grappling with. There's a sense that the werewolf curse is both literal and metaphorical. It's a monstrous physical transformation, yes, but it's also a manifestation of the darkness that's woven into the fabric of the Talbot family history.
Speaking of symbolism, the review calls out recurring visual motifs, the full moon, shadows, and blood. Those are pretty standard horror elements, but how do you think the Wolfman uses them to enhance its psychological and thematic depth?
These visual motifs operate on multiple levels. The full moon, for example, is traditionally linked to lunacy and the unleashing of primal instincts. In The Wolfman, it's not just a trigger for the transformation. It becomes a visual metaphor for the cyclical nature of violence and the loss of control. And the shadows, so prevalent in Gothic horror, they work to visually reinforce the idea of hidden truths and the darkness that lurks beneath the surface of both individuals and society. The way those shadows play across the characters' faces, obscuring their expressions, heightens the sense of mystery and unease. It's as though the film itself is trying to keep secrets from us.
It sounds like the film is really using those visual elements to tell a story beyond the dialogue, adding layers of meaning and subtext.
Exactly. It's using a visual language that speaks to our subconscious, tapping into primal fears and anxieties. And then you have the blood, which is always potent in horror, but in The Wolfman, it's particularly evocative. It's not just about gore. It's about the stain of violence, the way it spreads and corrupts. It becomes a visual representation of the curse itself, passed down through generations, tainting everything it touches.
That's fascinating. It makes me think about how the color red, the color of blood, is often associated with passion, rage, and primal energy. Is the film playing with that symbolism as well?
Absolutely. Color symbolism is crucial in any visual medium, and in The Wolfman, it's used to great effect. The red of the blood stands in stark contrast to the muted grays and blues of the Gothic setting, highlighting the eruption of violence amidst the repressed, somber atmosphere.
The review briefly mentions the female lead, Gwen, played by Emily Blunt, describing her role as like a grounding presence. I'm wondering if her character offers any interesting insights into the film's themes, particularly the idea of duality.
Gwen's role is intriguing because she represents a kind of innocence and purity that contrasts sharply with the darkness consuming Lawrence. She becomes a symbol of hope, a potential anchor to humanity that Lawrence desperately clings to.
It sounds like she might represent the opposite of the werewolf archetype, the civilizing force that attempts to tame the beast. But given the review's comments about her underdeveloped character arc, it seems like the film might not fully explore that potential.
That's a valid point. There's definitely a missed opportunity to delve deeper into Gwen's role and how she navigates the increasingly chaotic and terrifying events unfolding around her. Her perspective could have offered a powerful counterpoint to Lawrence's descent into darkness.
The review mentions that The Wolfman is a reimagining of the 1941 classic. Do you think the 2010 version does anything particularly interesting or different with the werewolf myth, especially considering the film's focus on psychological horror?
What sets this version apart is its emphasis on internal conflict. The werewolf isn't just a monster, it's a manifestation of Lawrence's psychological turmoil, a symbol of his struggle with repressed desires and the trauma of his past.
It sounds like The Wolfman takes the classic monster movie trope and adds a layer of psychological complexity, making it more about inner demons than external threats.
Precisely. The film blurs the line between monster and man, suggesting that the true horror lies not in the physical transformation, but in the disintegration of the self.
The review criticizes the film's uneven pacing and reliance on CGI in some scenes, arguing that those elements detract from the overall impact. Do you think those criticisms are valid?
Pacing is crucial in horror, particularly psychological horror. The slow build of tension, punctuated by moments of shock and release, is what keeps the audience on edge. If the rhythm is off, it can definitely undermine the effectiveness of the scares.
And while CGI has become increasingly sophisticated, it still sometimes lacks the visceral impact of practical effects, especially in a genre like horror, where tactile physical sensations play such a crucial role in generating fear.
Agreed. There's a rawness and immediacy to practical effects that CGI often struggles to replicate. Think about the transformation scenes in classic horror films like An American Werewolf in London or The Thing. The tangible, grotesque nature of those transformations, the way they seem to violate the boundaries of the human body, creates a level of visceral horror that's hard to achieve with digital effects alone.
I'm curious about how the film's emphasis on psychology and symbolism might connect to some of the social anxieties of the Victorian era, which is when the story is set. The review mentions the villagers' fear of the werewolf. But could that fear be interpreted as something more than just a fear of a monster?
The Victorian era was a time of rapid social and scientific change, a time when traditional beliefs were being challenged, and the boundaries between reason and superstition were becoming increasingly blurred. The fear of the werewolf, a creature that straddles the line between human and animal, civilized and savage, could be seen as a reflection of those anxieties.
So the werewolf becomes an embodiment of everything that Victorian society was trying to repress, a symbol of the primal instincts lurking beneath the surface of their carefully constructed world.
Exactly. The werewolf represents the eruption of the irrational into the realm of reason, a reminder that the veneer of civilization is thin and easily shattered.
And the film, by setting the story in Victorian England, is able to tap into those anxieties while also exploring those same themes in a way that resonates with modern audiences.
Precisely. The fear of the unknown, the fear of losing control, the fear of the darkness within. These are timeless and universal themes that transcend any particular historical period.
The review states that the film received a 7 out of 10 rating, and that despite its flaws, it has garnered appreciation for its visual style and commitment to Gothic horror. For fans of The Wolfman, what other films would you recommend that explore similar themes or aesthetics?
Well, if you're interested in Gothic horror that delves into psychological darkness, Bram Stoker's Dracula is a must-see. It's visually stunning and explores themes of forbidden desire, the seductive power of evil, and the blurring of boundaries between life and death. It's a very sensual, operatic take on the vampire myth, and it shares some thematic similarities with The Wolfman in its exploration of repressed desires and the consequences of succumbing to them.
It's a great recommendation. I love how Coppola uses color and visual symbolism in that film. It's almost like a fever dream at times with those rich reds and blacks dominating the palette. Anything else come to mind?
If you're looking for something that leans more towards the psychological thriller side of horror, I would recommend The Silence of the Lambs. It's not a monster movie in the traditional sense, but it explores similar themes of duality, the darkness within, and the struggle to contain the primal urges that lurk beneath the surface of civilized society.
Ooh, that's a good one. The way that film pits Clarice Starling against Hannibal Lecter, forcing her to confront not only a brilliant and terrifying serial killer, but also the darkness within herself. It's masterful psychological horror.
And it's interesting to note the symbolic parallels between Hannibal Lecter and the werewolf. Both are highly intelligent creatures driven by primal instincts. Both represent a threat to the social order, and both force us to confront the uncomfortable truth that the monster may not be so different from ourselves.
That's a chilling thought. And it makes me think about how The Wolfman, with its focus on Lawrence's internal struggle, is really asking us to consider what happens when those primal instincts take over. Is it a complete loss of self? Or is there a part of us that remains even in the midst of the transformation?
That's a question that lies at the heart of the film, and it's something that viewers will likely have different interpretations of. Is the werewolf a separate entity that takes control of Lawrence? Or is it simply an unleashed aspect of his own personality?
It seems like the film, by blurring those lines, is suggesting that maybe there isn't such a clear distinction between man and monster, between the civilized self and the primal urges that we all carry within us.
Exactly, and that ambiguity, that uncertainty about what constitutes the true self, is what makes the Wolfman so unsettling. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable possibility that the monster may not be something external to ourselves, but rather a part of our own nature that we desperately try to repress.
And perhaps that's the ultimate horror, the realization that the darkness we fear most might not be something lurking in the shadows, but something residing within us all along.
Precisely. The true monster is not the one with fangs and claws, but the one that lurks in the depths of our own psyche, the one that we might not even recognize until it's too late.
So, while the film delivers on a visual and atmospheric level, its real power lies in its exploration of those deeper, more unsettling psychological themes. It seems like the Wolfman uses the werewolf myth to tap into these primal fears about the loss of control and the fragility of our civilized selves. It's not just a monster movie. It's a psychological thriller that forces us to confront the darkness within.
Exactly. And that makes it all the more unsettling. We tend to think of monsters as external threats, something separate from ourselves. But the Wolfman suggests that the real monster might be something we carry within us all along.
The review didn't go into detail about how the film portrays the villagers' reactions to the werewolf. But I'm wondering if there's a social commentary element there as well. Could the villagers' fear and suspicion be seen as a metaphor for how society often reacts to those who are different, those who don't fit in?
That's a perceptive observation. Horror often uses monsters as a way to explore social anxieties and prejudices. The werewolf, as a creature that blurs the line between human and animal, civilized and savage, could easily be seen as a symbol of the other, anyone who deviates from the norms of society and is therefore perceived as a threat.
So the film is not just about one man's transformation into a monster, but also about society's tendency to create monsters out of those it doesn't understand or fears.
Precisely. And that fear of the other is often rooted in a lack of understanding, a refusal to acknowledge the shared humanity that binds us all. It's easier to demonize and ostracize those who are different than to confront the complexities of human nature.
It sounds like The Wolfman offers multiple layers of interpretation, blending psychological horror with social commentary to create a film that's both entertaining and thought-provoking.
It's a film that works on both a visceral and an intellectual level, appealing to our primal fears while also engaging with deeper questions about identity, duality, and the nature of good and evil.
If you had to sum up the key takeaways from this deep dive into The Wolfman, what would they be?
I'd say the film is most successful in its use of gothic atmosphere and visual symbolism to create a sense of dread and unease. The performances, especially Del Toro's, are compelling and draw you into the psychological turmoil at the heart of the story. And thematically, the film explores complex ideas about transformation, duality, and the darkness that resides within us all.
And despite its flaws, particularly the uneven pacing and the reliance on CGI in some scenes, it sounds like The Wolfman is a film that rewards close attention and encourages viewers to think about the deeper implications of the story.
Absolutely. It's a film that lingers in the mind long after the credits roll, prompting us to ask ourselves, what are the monsters we create in our own lives? And how do we confront the darkness within ourselves and within our societies?
Those are powerful questions, and ones that resonate far beyond the confines of a horror film. Thanks for diving deep with me into this fascinating and complex film.
My pleasure. And for our listener, I encourage you to watch The Wolfman and draw your own conclusions. Pay attention to the visual details, the recurring motifs, the way the characters interact with each other and with their environment. And most importantly, ask yourself, what does the film say about the human condition? About the darkness that we all carry within us?
That's a perfect note to end on. A little bit unsettling, a little bit thought-provoking, just like a good horror film should be. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and never be afraid to face your own inner wolf.